Hi everybody, it's Colin. This last Tuesday evening was Ballantine Photography Club's monthly meeting, and I was doing a presentation called Snapshot to ProShot. And of course, as it sounds, I was trying to instill in people the importance of taking photographs with intent, going out and getting photographs that they were getting by design and not by accident. And even still, sometimes once we're out there and we're taking pictures, we get photographs that are not quite where we want them to be from a final image perspective. So today what I'd like to do is show you how I treated one of the images that I showed that evening. And it really comes down from a guy called William Allard that I learned from at a workshop a few years back. William Allard is and has been a photographer for National Geographic for about 50 years or more, so there's a lot to learn from people who've been around a long time. And one of the things that stuck with me that he would say is, look for the photograph within your photograph. So if you're having a problem with the photograph, look for what's inside it. Try to break it down, put it back together into its element, take it from separate elements and put those elements back together. So he's really saying, look at the pieces of the photograph. Find what works within the photograph and build your photograph from there as a final image. So, more simplistic, it's just easier to show you the kind of process that I used on this particular image, which I took at Latta Plantation at a Revolutionary War reenactment some time ago. But, just imagine the scene of battle going on here. These guys are running around like crazy people. They're carrying weapons, they are running from one place to the next, they're firing guns and running to the next place. And I was set up with my camera on a tripod with a gimbal head so I could follow the action fairly easily. But sometimes the people were just too far away, even with the lens that I was using. I was using a 600mm lens, that I really wasn't able to get the crop that I was looking for or the composition that I was looking for within the image. So this was one of those that happened with. And what struck me about this image after the fact, and why I took it in the first place, and why his head is not part of the photograph, is that I was really interested in the way he was carrying this rifle as he was running from one station to the next. So he was actually in motion when I took this picture. He was running, and it was the way he was carrying this rifle that really struck me. And I really wanted to pull your attention and focus as a viewer into that. As you can see, this isn't a particularly special image at the moment, mainly because we've got this person standing here in the background. If you follow my cursor, you'll see that there is another person standing over here that really my eye is drawn to because of that white sleeve on the guy's shirt. Also, there's a lot of dead empty space here on the left as well. So what I'm going to do first of all is get rid of that. Of course, I'll need to crop the image. I did the best I could in camera at the time I shot it, but we're going to now look at how else and what else we can do to improve this image. So the first thing here, I'm going to activate my crop overlay by clicking the crop button in the develop area. And it gives me the overlay in landscape mode. I actually want it in portrait mode. I want to really get rid of a lot of this extraneous information. So to switch the crop overlay into portrait, I'm just going to click the letter X on my keyboard to do that. Now you'll see that the crop overlay crops probably a little bit too much for me. Because if I want to get this little satchel in the image, I'm cutting off a little bit too much of the image on the right hand side as well. So I want to change the crop overlay. To do that, I need to change the aspect ratio of the crop overlay, and I do that over again just over here on the develop area where it says aspect, and I can click in the space next to aspect, and I'm going to choose 8:10. The reason I want to choose an 8 is that I want to increase the width, okay, of this portrait, so I'm going to choose 8:10. As I move the image around, now I have, because I'll increase the size of the crop overlay, a little bit more room to maneuver and give myself a little bit more space here to add more into the image. Okay. What I'm looking at is not quite cutting off his coat, the red part of his coat. I want the detail of his satchel, but I definitely want all of this other information out of the way, and I really am looking at trying to pull your attention to the hands. So I've placed this PowerPoint. You can see I've got my grid lines active here, so the PowerPoint with the rule of thirds is right about where the knuckle is. If I want to maneuver it a little bit more, just to make sure I get that a little bit more on the PowerPoint of where those two third lines, the horizontal and vertical lines, intersect. Okay, that's my methodology for the crop. So let's go ahead and hit done, and we'll take that crop. Now the photograph still needs a little bit of help. It's been changed, of course, giving you a lot more detail now of the parts of that photograph that I want you to see. But there's still some work to be done because I was shooting in RAW. What I'm going to do is scroll down on the right hand side until I get down to the camera calibration section. You'll see here where it says Profile, Adobe Standard is what is currently active, and I want to activate just by clicking where it says Adobe Standard. I'm going down to Camera Vivid. So this shows my camera's color spaces, so, or actually not the color space, but the saturation differences that I can get from all these different options that I can set in my camera, and these read through to Lightroom. So I'm going to click the Camera Vivid option, and when I do that, you're going to see a real punch of color. Okay, so it really makes those reds pop. I'm going to do a little bit more color enhancement. I'm going to scroll back up into my develop area, and I like to maximize my blacks. I like to get a nice D-max, as we would call it back in the old science days. So I'm going to activate my Show Shadow Clipping tool up here, up on the histogram, so I can see when I go too far. When I go too far, the black areas are going to pop a little bit of blue to tell me that I've gone too far, and I ease off once I start to see those blue bits coming up. You see where all that blue is? Well, that's too much. Okay, so I'm going to ease back on the slider. I want to get to just about where the blues are visible, but not too much. Okay, so I'm looking around about 14 on that. Okay, I'm going to switch that back off so that the blue no longer bugs me. But I've maximized my blacks here. The other thing I want to do is increase the clarity down in the presence section of the develop module, and I'm going to increase clarity. So this gives me a little bit of clarity between edges of color. Okay, it almost looks like it sharpens the image, but that's not what is really happening. It's actually sharpening, increasing the contrast between color edges. And then I'm going to increase the vibrance as well. This gives me a little bit of color boost in those mid-tone colors. Okay, so those colors that usually look a little bit flatter, if you increase the vibrance, then they will start to get a little bit more vibrant. Saturation is really doing the same thing, but it does it for every tonality. Vibrance just increases the saturation of those colors in the midtones. Okay, so we've already got a huge difference here. The final thing that I think, actually no, there are two things I want to do. One more that I want to do is just on the exposure. I'm going to bring the exposure down, mainly because I'm looking at the exposure of the hands. And I really want to bring the exposure down by between about a third and I think a half a stop. I'm just going to see where we get to on this. So yeah, we're around about 0.7 on that. That's a little bit too dark. Let's slide it back up if I can, just gently. There, we'll end up at about 0.5. So I've darkened it, darkened the image, but I'm really looking at the exposure of the hand. Okay? Because the darker the background, then the more focus is going to go to the hand, because it becomes part of the brightest part of the image. The final thing I'm then going to do is add a vignette. I'm going to move over to the left hand side of the screen to these Lightroom presets. Well, you see I'm going to choose vignette number 2. So again, that adds a little bit more darkening, specifically around the edges of the image. So I'm trying to force you into this image by looking at the brightest part, which are now the hands, and darkening the extremities of the image there. Okay, so that is the process I went through with this particular image. I'm going to skip out of Develop Module here. I'm going to click on the Library mode. I do have the original image still, and I'm going to control click it. So you'll see it down here on my scroll. I'm going to hold control and click the original image. So I'll put these side by side, and then I'll shift tab to increase my real estate. Okay, so now of course you can see a dramatic difference between these two images, going from the one on the right, which is where we originated the image in RAW file, to the one on the left, which is now ready for me to export and print or display or do whatever I want with. But you can see that just because you get a photograph that might not be quite there, there's some editing. Look for the image within the image, and we can actually improve some of the pictures that we take quite considerably, from okay so-so to providing a little bit more impact to the viewer. Well, I hope this has been informative, educational, and fun. So until next time, I will leave it there for you. Okay? Thanks for listening. We'll see you soon.